Hello everyone, today we are going to look at rent across the UK. We're going to look at which cities and towns are on fire, which ones are on life support, where is rent growing, where is rent falling across the UK. I usually do a monthly update on house prices, how they change in the UK month to month, but I'm going to expand that now to rents every quarter because it's really interesting to see how rents are also doing across the UK. So let's start with a summary. These figures are taken from a sample of 470,000 properties in the UK, so a big sample, a lot of good data to go by, very indicative of the rest of the UK. So let's start with a summary. This table is basically split between the rest of the UK, which is the top table here, and London. Reason why is because, I've said it 100 times before guys, London is a bubble. What happens in London is very specific to us within the M25, and the rest of the UK behaves differently. So it's always a good idea to separate out the two when we're talking about trends in property. So overall, London is generally stagnant when it comes to rental growth from quarter to quarter and actually declining year on year. Rest of the UK is growing, albeit at a small rate quarter to quarter, and when you look at it from 2020 to 21, i.e. year to year, healthy growth there. And by the way, when we're talking about quarters, we're talking about a 3-month period. So quarter one is January to March, quarter two is March to June. And let's have a quick look at the numbers. So for the first 3 months of this year, from January to March, the average rent across the rest of the UK, i.e. not including London, was £982, and then from March to June that grew to just over £1,000, £1,007 to be exact, so a 2.6% growth. When you compare the first 3 months of the year from January to March of 2021, the equivalent period for 2020, i.e. January to March 2020, we are 4.2% higher than that and 6.2% higher from March to June. So overall, what are we saying? So in summary, the quarters for 2021 have grown quite healthily compared to 2020, and we'll cover why that is further on in the video. Now looking at London, so from January to March 2021, i.e. the first 3 months of this year, rent was at £1,919 on average. From March to June, that has gone up very marginally by £30, just £30 guys, to £1,949, and that's reflected by that 1.5% change from quarter to quarter. When we compare to the same period in 2020, we're actually down by 7.8% for the first 3 months of this year and down by 3.1% for the second 3 months of this year. So this time last year, for these 2 quarters, rents were actually higher. And guys, let's take a quick moment to compare average rents between Greater London and the rest of the UK. So £1,919 versus £982, and £1,949 versus £1,007. So on average, Greater London is double the rent of the UK. Double the rent of the UK.
Jesus Christ.
I don't know about you guys, but for all of us living in London is literally twice as expensive as living anywhere else in the UK when it comes to rent. Now we can start to look at this data on a more granular city by city level. This table shows the main top 10 cities, so we can start to drill down into the data on a more city by city level. This table shows the primary 10 cities in the UK and how asking rents. Now, asking rents are the rents that landlords list their properties on the market for, and they generally achieve those. Sometimes they get negotiated downwards, but we're looking at asking rates for these cities for 2021 and 2020. This is the change between 2020 to 2021, and what they've helpfully done is given us the increase in tenant demand now compared to 2020, and we'll come on to why that's important in a sec. And then the second table is looking at the rental hotspots, the top 10 rental hotspots in the UK. These are basically the towns and cities that are on fire where rent is on steroids. So let's start with the primary cities in the UK. Let's first look at the increase in tenant demand versus 2020. Now in this column right here, you can see that demand is huge, guys. With the exception of Newcastle, 10% and upwards, going all the way up to 31% in Bristol, 28% in Birmingham, 37% in Manchester. These are huge numbers, guys. Now, why has demand risen on last year? Basically, guys, people are coming back into city centres after the global health crisis that we've just had. During 2020, people left cities. Where did they go? Well, they went out into country, guys. They went into more rural areas. They were looking for places to live that were less densely populated, with less people around them. They wanted more space. People went back to live with their parents. You can summarize it as urban flight. You might have a lot of friends, family, or even you yourself did the same during the global health crisis. Now that the health crisis has petered out and lockdown measures are relaxing, people are flooding back into the cities, guys. And that's why you've got these high numbers. There is a high demand for rental properties back in the cities. People are less scared. People are more relaxed about living in urban areas again, generally speaking. In terms of the price in these 10 cities, quite interestingly, with the exception of Edinburgh and Inner London, which is still down on last year, we've got quite modest growth across the other 8. So ranging from 6.8% increase in Nottingham to a 0.4% increase in Manchester. I personally would have expected these increases to be a lot higher given the rise in demand. However, we do have to consider the fact that after a year's worth of a global health crisis, people have lost jobs, wages have been stagnant, if not gone down. So it's not necessarily in a landlord's best interest to hike up rents on last year. So this might be part of the reason why we haven't seen huge increases in asking rents despite the large increase in demand. Landlords have basically got to read the room, guys. If you've had a property in one of these top cities that has been basically empty, or you've been struggling to fill it over the last 12 months, and renters are now starting to come back into these cities. However, they've been perhaps living with their parents, or they've been on furlough, or they've just gotten back into work. To now increase your rent by, say, 10%, 30%, 37%, you're almost going to be shooting yourself in the foot, guys. So I think that's a big reason behind these modest, relatively modest increases in rent over the last 12 months. I think maybe over the next 12 months, you'll see even bigger rises as people settle back into work for at least a year and their incomes normalize to what they were before, or even greater. Now let's look at the rental hotspots. It's always interesting to see the parts of the UK where rents and house prices are thriving the most. One thing to notice, guys, is that these areas are not capital cities. They're not your Londons, they're not your Newcastles, they're not your Birminghams, etc. These are more rural, green, suburban parts of the UK. And we said at the beginning of this video that people during the global health crisis, they left cities and they went to places that were greener, less densely populated. They wanted things like gardens, parks, etc. So if we have a look at, say, the top 3, we can actually see this on a map. So if we look at Rochdale, for example, Rochdale, look at this, surrounded by green, surrounded by country parks, nature reserves. And if we zoom out a bit, we've got Manchester here, which of course is a capital city. Rochdale is on the outskirts of Manchester. It's in more of the suburban, greener area. Same goes for Folkestone. If you know Kent, Folkestone is right by the coast. It's basically the beach out in Kent. The nearest city being London up here. And then you go out and then you're into green territory. You've got the Kent Downs there, and then Folkestone is right on the coast by the beach by Dover. And then lastly, let's have a quick look at Farnham. Again, surrounded by green. You've got golf clubs and forests around it. Farnham is just out of the South Downs National Park towards the coast. So these top 10 rental hotspots really do confirm what we've seen in terms of migration patterns in the UK out of cities towards more suburban areas. And then lastly, guys, let's zoom out of the city view and have a look at the regions. So we've looked at the whole of the UK and London. We've looked at the cities. Now let's look at the regions in terms of rent and some interesting trends, guys. We're talking about an average annual change. So when we say annual change, the rent level this year versus last year in 2020, basically around about 4% and upwards. So between 4% and 8%, so 4.6% in Scotland. Then as you come out of Scotland into the regions of England, 6.9% in the Northwest, 6.6% in the Midlands, 8% in the East Midlands, wow, 7.6% in the Southwest. So the regions of England are doing really well. Wales is doing really well at 7.5%. And then, as we saw at the beginning of this video, London is struggling, minus 3.1%. I think the reason behind that is because, as we saw at the beginning of the video, London is more expensive than the rest of the UK. Even though people are beginning to filter back into cities, we know that people have taken a financial hit during the global health crisis, so it's hard for London landlords in particular to put their rents up. People generally want to live outside of the busiest city in the UK, or busiest region if you want to call it, for the sake of this slide, in the UK. There's more demand, generally speaking, for the other regions within the UK, and that's why we're seeing these kind of patterns of growth compared to London. So guys, that's a summary of rental patterns in the UK. I'll do my next update in the next quarter, which is going to be the end of September. If you found this video useful, give it a like, share it, and I'll see you guys soon.